Galactic Empire killed the human child, so we showed them hell. The frontier station known as Lumen Reach floated between 3-star systems, a place where ships from 100 worlds passed through without ever staying long. Its curved metal halls glowed with soft blue light, and the air always carried a mix of strange scents from different species and their home planets. To the Galactic Empire, Lumen Reach was nothing more than a checkpoint, a dot on a star map that helped keep trade moving and rules enforced. To the people who lived and worked there, it was a small, fragile community in the endless dark of space. Humans were still new to this part of the galaxy. Their colonies were young, their alliances few, and their influence limited. Many older species saw them as emotional and unpredictable, a people who felt too deeply and spoke too openly. The Empire tolerated them because they were useful. Human engineers were clever. Human traders were persistent. Human diplomats were honest to a fault, but no one in the Imperial Council believed humans would ever truly matter. On this quiet rotation cycle, a human envoy ship had docked at Lumen Reach. It was not a warship or a grand diplomatic cruiser. It was small and simple, carrying a handful of representatives and their families. Among them was a child named Eli. Eli was 9 years old, with dark hair that never seemed to stay neat and curious eyes that always searched for something new. This was his first journey beyond human-controlled space. His mother, Mara, worked as a cultural liaison, helping explain human customs to other species. His father, Jonah, was a systems specialist who helped maintain communication networks between stations. Eli did not care about politics or trade agreements. He cared about the stars. He pressed his hands against the wide viewing window in the main corridor, staring out at the sea of lights that filled space. Ships of every shape drifted past, some smooth and silver, others jagged and dark, each carrying stories from worlds he could barely imagine. "Do you think they have oceans on that one?" he asked, pointing at a green-tinted planet in the distance. Myra smiled softly. "Some do, some have storms made of glass, and some have skies that glow at night." Eli's eyes widened. "I want to see them all," Jonah laughed. "One world at a time, explorer." The station was busy but calm. Traders moved between docks. Imperial officers walked their patrol routes, their polished armor reflecting the station's lights. Most people avoided them, not out of fear, but out of habit. The Empire was everywhere, and it preferred to be seen as unchallenged. Eli wandered a few steps ahead of his parents, following a small hovering guide drone that displayed maps and information in soft, floating symbols. He liked the way it chirped when he got too far from his assigned path. That was when the alarms began. They were not loud at first, just a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Lights shifted from blue to yellow, then to red. People stopped walking and looked around, confused. Imperial officers moved quickly, their voices sharp as they spoke into their communication devices. A message echoed through the station in a flat, mechanical tone. "Security protocol active." All civilians returned to assigned quarters. Mara reached for Eli's hand. "Stay close." They turned toward the nearest corridor that led back to the human ship's docking area. Around them, other species hurried away, their movements quick and nervous. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. Further down the hall, a group of Imperial enforcers appeared. Their armor was darker than the regular patrols, their helmets hiding their faces completely. They moved in a tight formation, scanning the crowd. Jonah slowed. "We should wait, let them pass." But the crowd behind them pressed forward, pushing them closer to the enforcers. Eli felt his mother's hand tighten around his. One of the enforcers raised a device, and a beam of light swept over the people in the corridor. It paused on Eli, then on Myra and Jonah. "Human group," a voice said through the helmet's speaker. "Unregistered movement." Myra stepped forward. "We were ordered to return to our quarters. We are doing that." There was a brief pause. The enforcers' helmets tilted slightly, as if they were receiving information. "Hold position," the voice replied. The crowd grew restless. Someone behind them bumped into Jonah. Eli stumbled, and for a moment his hand slipped from his mother's grasp. It happened in seconds. An enforcer turned suddenly, reacting to a movement that no one else seemed to notice. A flash of energy lit the corridor. Eli fell. The world seemed to stop. Myra screamed his name and dropped to her knees beside him. Jonah froze, unable to move, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. The enforcers stood still, their weapons lowering slowly. One of them spoke into their communicator, their voice calm, almost bored. Incident logged, civilian casualty. Cause protocol enforcement. Medics arrived, but it was too late. Eli's small body lay still on the cold metal floor, his eyes open, reflecting the red emergency lights above. Myra held him, rocking back and forth, her voice breaking as she whispered his name again and again. Jonah stood over them, his hands clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white. Around them, the crowd had gone silent. Even the station's hum seemed to fade. The Empire's report was brief. A misunderstanding, a security response, a necessary action. Eli's life became a line in a digital log, but humans did not see it that way. News of the incident traveled faster than any ship. It moved through human networks, through private messages and public broadcasts, through whispered conversations in spaceports and formal statements in council chambers. On Earth, people gathered in city squares to watch the footage. The blurred image of a small figure on a metal floor, the sound of a mother's scream. On distant colonies, miners stopped their work and stared at their screens in silence. Soldiers on remote outposts lowered their heads. Human leaders called for explanations. The Empire sent back official responses, filled with careful words and empty apologies. No one was punished. No one was held responsible. Myra and Jonah returned to Earth with a small, sealed container. Eli's favorite toy, a tiny model of a starship, was placed beside his name in a quiet memorial garden. For a while, it seemed like that would be the end of it. Another tragedy in a galaxy full of them, but something was changing. In shipyards across human space, workers began to talk, not loudly, not in anger, in low, steady voices. On trade routes, human pilots started to decline contracts that led through Imperial-controlled systems. They gave polite reasons: scheduling conflicts, technical issues. Personal matters. Engineers working on Imperial stations submitted resignations and returned home. Human diplomats canceled meetings. It was not a protest. It was not a declaration. It was a withdrawal. The Empire noticed but did not understand. To them, humans were small players. Their absence was an inconvenience, not a threat. Then a message appeared on human networks. It did not come from a government or a military leader. It came from a group of teachers on a colony world who had been helping children learn about the galaxy. The message was simple. They showed a drawing made by a child. It was of a human figure standing among stars, holding hands with shapes that represented other species. Above it were written 3 words in uneven letters. "We will remember." The message spread. Ships painted Eli's name on their hulls, not as a symbol of anger but of memory. Across human space, people began to share stories, stories of loss. Stories of standing up for those who could not stand for themselves. On Lumen Reach, life went on. The station's lights returned to blue, the corridors filled with movement again. But some of the workers noticed something strange. The humans were gone. Their ship remained docked but empty. Their offices were cleared, their quarters silent. In the vastness of space, the Empire had taken a small life and expected nothing to change. They were wrong. Far away in the quiet dark between stars, human fleets began to move. Not in formation, not with banners or announcements. They moved like a tide, slow and steady, carrying with them a promise that did not need to be spoken. The galaxy would remember the name of a child. The human ships did not announce themselves as they moved. There were no grand speeches, no banners across the stars, and no loud signals sent to the Galactic Empire. The ships simply changed their routes. Trade lanes that once glowed with human traffic slowly dimmed. Stations that depended on human engineers and pilots began to feel the quiet. On the edge of Imperial space, a cargo station called Brightfall noticed it first. The docks were built to handle thousands of ships each cycle, but now entire bays sat empty. A station manager named Corin, a tall, four-armed being from a water world, stood on an observation platform and watched the silence grow. "Where are the humans?" Corin asked one of his assistants. The assistant checked the trade logs, scrolling through lines of data. "They canceled their contracts, all of them, different reasons but the same result." Corin felt a ripple of unease. Humans were not the biggest traders in the galaxy, but they were everywhere. They connected small worlds to large ones. They fixed broken systems. They carried news and supplies to places the Empire rarely bothered to reach. Without them, the galaxy felt slower. On an Imperial command station called High Spire, officers gathered in a wide circular chamber. The room was filled with glowing star maps and shifting data screens. The Empire's leaders watched as more human roots faded from the display. "It is a temporary disruption," one of them said, a tall figure with silver markings across their face. "They are emotional. They will return." Another officer, older and quieter, leaned closer to the screen. "They are not returning, they are organizing." The Empire did not like that word. Meanwhile, on a small human colony world called Haven's Rise, Mara sat in a simple classroom filled with empty chairs. She had once helped teach children about other species and distant stars. Now the room felt too quiet. Jonah stood by the window looking out at the fields where ships were landing one after another. Not warships, cargo vessels, exploration craft, old freighters pulled out of retirement. "They keep coming," he said softly. Mara nodded. They heard. Humans from across their space were arriving. Pilots, engineers, teachers, traders, not because they were told to, but because they chose to. In the center of the colony, a large open area became a meeting place. People gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. There were no leaders standing on platforms. No one gave orders. They shared stories instead. A pilot spoke about escorting a refugee ship through a dangerous nebula. An engineer talked about rebuilding a station that the Empire had abandoned. A doctor told a quiet story about helping a child from another species learn how to breathe in a new atmosphere. Every story ended the same way. "This is why we go out there." Across the galaxy, other species began to notice the change in humans. A trader from a crystal-based world told their council that human ships now traveled in groups, always stopping to help smaller vessels along the way. A station governor reported that humans were offering free repairs and supplies to non-imperial outposts. "They are building something," the governor said. "Not an army, a network." On a distant moon controlled by the Empire, a young Imperial officer named Terran watched a group of humans prepare to leave the station. They loaded their tools and supplies onto a transport ship. Their faces were calm but determined. "You are abandoning your post," Terran said, trying to sound firm. One of the humans, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at him. "We are choosing our future." Terran did not know how to respond. As the ship lifted off, he felt something shift inside him. The Empire had taught him that order was everything. That stability mattered more than individuals. But the way the humans left, together and without anger, made him wonder if there was another kind of strength. The Imperial Council began to feel pressure from unexpected places. Minor species complained that trade had slowed. Frontier worlds asked why their stations were breaking down without human technicians. Even loyal systems started to question the silence from their human neighbors. The Empire sent messages to human governments, formal, polite, and cold. "Return to your duties. This disruption affects galactic stability." The responses came back just as polite. "We are focusing on our own people." No further explanation was given. In a quiet shipyard near Earth, a young shipbuilder named Rhea worked late into the night. She was helping modify an old exploration vessel, adding stronger shields and longer-range communication systems. Her friend Malik handed her a cup of warm drink. "You think we'll need all this?" Rhea looked at the ship's name, freshly painted on its side, Eli's Light. "I think we'll need to be ready," she said, "for whatever comes next." The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Then one cycle, a human ship arrived at a border world known for its harsh conditions and strict Imperial control. Instead of passing through, it docked. The station's systems were failing. Power flickered. Life support struggled. The Empire had delayed repairs, considering the world low priority. The human crew offered help. The station's commander hesitated but accepted. The humans worked side by side with local workers, fixing generators and stabilizing the station's systems. They shared food, stories, and laughter. When they left, they did not ask for payment. News of this spread faster than any official message. On a world of tall, winged beings, children watched human ships pass overhead and waved. On a mining colony, workers painted small symbols of stars and hands clasped together on their equipment, copying what they had seen on human vessels. The Empire saw influence where they expected obedience. On High Spire, the older officer spoke again. "They are changing the balance, not through force, through trust." The silver-marked leader frowned. "Trust is fragile." "Yes," the older one replied, "but it spreads." Back on Haven's Rise, Myra visited the small memorial garden where Eli's name was carved into a simple stone. Flowers from different worlds had been placed around it. Some glowed softly in the dark, others hummed in the breeze. She knelt and touched the stone. "You would have liked this," she whispered. "So many stars coming together." Jonah stood beside her. "Do you think the Empire understands what's happening?" Mara shook her head. "Not yet." Far away, human fleets continued to move. They did not gather in one place. They spread out, connecting worlds, helping where they could, listening where no one else would. They became something the galaxy had not seen before. Not a power to fear, a presence to rely on, and deep within the Empire's vast territory, systems began to realize that they were no longer alone. The stars felt different now, not quieter, but fuller. As if the galaxy itself was learning a new way to breathe, guided by the memory of a child who had once pressed his hands against a window and dreamed of seeing every world. The Empire still stood tall, its fleet strong and its laws firm. But in the spaces between its control, something brighter was growing. The stars around the system called Gray Veil had always been quiet. It was a place the Empire used as a crossroads, a wide, empty space where fleets could gather and move in any direction. There were no planets nearby, no stations for civilians, only a few large platforms that held fuel depots and communication towers. It was the kind of place where power liked to show itself. On this cycle, the Empire sent one of its largest fleets there. Rows of massive ships drifted in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting the cold light of distant suns. From the command bridge of the lead vessel, Admiral Korvek watched the display screens with calm confidence. "This should end the uncertainty," Korvek said. "If the humans are planning something, they will respond to this." The officers around him nodded. The Empire believed in presence, in being seen, in making sure the galaxy remembered who held control. But the system was empty. No human ships, no signals, no signs of life. "Scan again," Korvek ordered. The sensors swept the space around them, reaching far into the dark. The results came back the same. Nothing. On a small human ship far from Gray Veil, a navigator named Leela watched a different set of screens. Her ship, a light explorer vessel, drifted near the edge of a star system that was not marked on most maps. Around her, dozens of other ships held position, each one small compared to the Empire's massive fleet, but together forming a quiet pattern across space. "They're there," she said softly into her communicator. "Right where we thought," a calm voice replied. "Hold position, let them see what they've chosen to ignore." Across the sector, hidden stations began to wake. These were not military bases. They were old listening posts, research platforms, and trade hubs that humans and their allies had quietly connected over time. When the humans had withdrawn from the Empire's systems, they had not vanished. They had moved into the spaces between control. In Gray Veil, the Empire's fleet waited. Then the stars changed. Small points of light began to appear across the darkness. At first, the Imperial officers thought they were distant ships or sensor errors. But the lights grew brighter, forming lines and shapes that stretched across the system. "Admiral," an officer said, "those are signals, communication beacons." Korvek leaned forward. "From where?" The answer came slowly as the data filled the screens. "From everywhere." Across the system, hidden transmitters activated. They were not human alone. The signals carried codes from dozens of species, trade guilds, frontier worlds, independent stations, groups that had never spoken with one voice before. The messages were simple. "We are here." On Haven's Rise, Jonah stood in a crowded control room watching the same star maps. Myra stood beside him, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "They're all connected now," Jonah said. "Every world that accepted help, every station that listened." Myra nodded. Eli would have loved this, the stars talking to each other. In Gray Veil, the Empire's officers spoke in tense, clipped tones. The fleet was surrounded not by ships, but by presence. The communication channels filled with requests, questions, and statements from across the sector. A message appeared on the main screen, marked as open broadcast. "This is a coalition of independent systems," a calm voice said. "We are not here to challenge your fleets. We are here to challenge your choices." Korvek's expression hardened. "This is unauthorized. Clear the channel." The officer hesitated. "There are too many signals, Admiral. We cannot block them all." The voice continued. "You rule through silence and distance. We connect through memory and care. A child's life reminded us that order without compassion is empty. The Empire's ships did not move. They did not fire. They simply waited, unsure of what to do in a moment that was not built for weapons. On a small moon near the edge of the system, a group of non-human settlers gathered around a screen, watching the broadcast. They had once lived under strict Imperial control, their needs often ignored. Human ships had been the first to bring them spare parts, medicine, and teachers. "We are not alone anymore," one of them said quietly. The human fleets did not arrive in Gray Vale. They did not need to. Instead, human ships appeared across the Empire's territory, not in force but in presence. They docked at stations, helped repair systems, escorted vulnerable convoys, and listened to local leaders. They did what the Empire had stopped doing. They paid attention. A young Imperial officer named Terran, now stationed on a remote outpost, watched a human ship arrive. The station's power grid had been unstable for months. The Empire had delayed support again and again. The humans did not wait for permission. They worked with the station's crew, sharing tools and knowledge. Terran found himself standing beside a human engineer holding a light as they adjusted a control panel. "Why do you do this?" Terran asked. "You don't gain anything." The engineer smiled. "We gain a better tomorrow." Terran did not fully understand, but he felt the truth of the words. Back in Gray Vale, Admiral Korvek received a final message, not from a government or a coalition. It was a recording. A small human voice filled the bridge. "Do you think they have oceans on that one?" The officers froze. Korvek stared at the screen as the image of a child pressing his hands against a window appeared. The recording ended with a soft laugh and the sound of distant stars. The message below it read, "This is who we remember." Silence filled the bridge. The Empire's fleet remained in formation, but something had shifted. The display screens now showed not empty space, but a web of connections stretching far beyond their reach. Across the galaxy, worlds that had once felt small began to speak louder. Not in anger, but in unity. On Haven's Rise, Myra and Jonah stood in the open field where ships still arrived and departed. Children ran between them, pointing at the sky, asking questions about distant worlds. One child looked up at Mara. "Do you think the stars can hear us?" Mara smiled. "I think they always could. We just forgot how to listen." The galaxy was changing. Not through battles or broken worlds, but through a quiet, steady choice to stand together. The Empire still had its fleets, its laws, its power. But now, everywhere it looked, it saw something new, not fear, not obedience, but connection. The galaxy did not change all at once. It changed in small moments, in quiet places where no grand fleets gathered and no speeches were made. It changed in stations where lights flickered back to full strength after months of dim power. It changed on lonely moons where children finally had teachers again. It changed in the space between worlds, where human ships continued to travel not as a single force, but as many gentle lines of light. On a wide trade station called Silver Path, a market that once served only Imperial-approved merchants now buzzed with voices from many species. Stalls filled the long corridors, selling food, tools, art, and strange, glowing objects from distant systems. The air carried a mix of scents and soft music from instruments no one could name. At the center of the station, a human captain named Rhea stood beside her ship, Eli's Light. The name had become known across the sector, not as a symbol of power, but as a sign that help had arrived. A small group of station workers approached her. One of them, a tall being with feather-like skin, bowed slightly. "We want to thank you," the worker said. "The Empire never sent support when our systems failed. You did." Rhea shook her head. "We didn't come to be thanked. We came because someone needed us." The worker smiled in a way that showed both relief and something like hope. Far away, on the grand halls of the Imperial capital world, the council met in uneasy silence. The wide chamber, once filled with confidence and command, now felt heavy. Reports floated in the air as glowing symbols, showing system after system where Imperial control was weakening. Trade routes had shifted. Independent councils had formed. Stations once loyal now spoke openly with human representatives. "They are not taking our worlds," one council member said. "They are taking our influence." Another replied, "They are offering something we never did." "What is that?" the first demanded. The answer came softly. "Choice." On a remote planet of endless red plains, a small group of settlers gathered around a landing site as a human ship touched down. The settlers had lived under Imperial rule for generations. Their world considered too small to matter. Supplies were rare. News from the wider galaxy almost never reached them. The human crew stepped out, carrying crates of medicine, tools, and learning devices. They set up a simple station where children could gather and explore images of distant stars. One of the settlers, an older being with deep lines across their face, watched quietly. "We were told you would bring war," they said to a human crew member. The human smiled gently. "We brought books." The older being let out a soft, surprised sound that might have been a laugh. Across the sector, human fleets became something like moving stories. Wherever they went, people shared what they had seen. A station saved from collapse. A trade route reopened. A child learning how to write their name in a new language. These stories traveled faster than any official broadcast. Even within the Empire's own ranks, change began to grow. Terran, the young officer who had once watched humans leave his station, now served on a larger outpost near the border of independent space. He saw the difference every day. Where once the station's halls were quiet and tense, now they were filled with visiting ships and open conversations. One evening, he stood on a balcony overlooking the docking bays as a group of human ships arrived. Their hulls carried marks and symbols from many worlds, painted alongside the simple star and hand design that had become their sign. A fellow officer joined him. "They don't act like a fleet," the officer said. "They act like neighbors," Terran nodded. "Maybe that's why people listen to them." Back on Haven's Rise, Mara walked through the growing settlement near the spaceport. What had once been a quiet colony had become a meeting place for travelers from dozens of systems. Small buildings rose around open courtyards where people gathered to talk, trade, and share meals. Mara often helped organize learning circles where children from different species sat together, drawing pictures of their home worlds and asking each other questions. Eli's drawing of stars and hands still hung on the wall of the main hall, carefully protected behind a clear shield. One afternoon, a child from a distant moon pointed at the drawing. "Who made that?" they asked. Mara knelt beside them. "A boy who loved the stars." "Is he a hero?" the child asked. Mara thought for a moment. "He didn't try to be, he just wanted to see the galaxy." The child smiled. "I want to be like that." In the Imperial capital, the Council received a new kind of report. Not about lost systems or failed patrols, but about internal unrest. Some Imperial worlds were asking for more autonomy. Others were requesting human advisors. "This is spreading too far," one council member said. "We must show strength." The older council member, the one who had warned them before, spoke again. "Strength does not always look like control." "What does it look like then?" another demanded. The older one looked at the star map, now filled with glowing lines of connection. "It looks like being chosen." The Empire sent a delegation to Haven's Rise, not soldiers, not enforcers, diplomats. Their ship landed in the open field where so many human and non-human vessels had touched down before. The Imperial representatives stepped out, their formal robes and polished symbols standing in sharp contrast to the simple clothes of the people waiting to greet them. Mara stood near the front of the crowd, Jonah beside her. The lead diplomat spoke. "The Empire wishes to open a new dialogue. We see that the galaxy is changing." A murmur moved through the gathered people. Jonah stepped forward. "We've been talking for a long time, you just didn't listen." The diplomat hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps it is time we do." The talks did not happen in grand halls. They happened in open spaces under wide skies with people from many worlds sitting in circles. They shared food, stories, and concerns. The Empire's representatives listened to farmers, traders, teachers, and engineers. They heard about worlds forgotten by supply lines, about children who had grown up without seeing a doctor, about stations that had nearly failed because no one had considered them important enough to save. The diplomats did not always have answers. But they wrote everything down. Terran, now assigned as part of the Imperial support team, watched these meetings with quiet wonder. This was not the Empire he had been trained to serve. This was something new. One evening, he found himself speaking with a human teacher. "Do you think this will last?" he asked. "This peace," the teacher smiled softly. "Peace isn't something you keep, it's something you keep choosing." In the space between systems, Admiral Korvek stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the same web of connections grow brighter each cycle. He had not been ordered to move his fleet. There was nowhere to move it that would change what was happening. A message came in from the Imperial capital. Stand down, observe, report. Korvek closed his eyes for a moment. The Empire had always believed it was the center of the galaxy. Now it was learning it was only one part of it. Across the stars, human ships continued their quiet work. They repaired, taught, escorted, and listened. They did not demand loyalty. They did not claim worlds. They offered something simple, a place in a larger story. On Haven's rise, as the sun set and the sky filled with distant lights, Myra and Jonah stood near the memorial garden. More names had been added now, not of those lost, but of worlds that had joined the growing network. Each name represented a connection, a promise, a shared future. Mara looked up at the stars. "You did this in a way," she whispered. "You reminded us why we go out there." Jonah placed a hand on her shoulder. He reminded the galaxy too. The stars above seemed to glow a little brighter, not because of any great power or grand fleet, but because so many voices across so many worlds were finally speaking to each other. The Empire still existed. Its banners still flew on many planets. Its ships still traveled the main lanes of space. But now, everywhere those ships went, they found something they had never expected. Not resistance, not rebellion. The galaxy had changed, but no one marked the moment with fanfare. There were no massive parades, no grand speeches, and no towering statues. Instead, the change spread quietly in the corridors of stations, on the decks of ships, and across the open skies of distant worlds. The memory of one small human child had grown into a presence that was felt in every corner of human-controlled space and beyond. On a small neutral station called Starbridge, floating in the void between two major systems, representatives from dozens of species gathered. The station's central plaza was alive with chatter, laughter, and the gentle hum of hovering drones carrying messages, packages, and small items from one end to another. Here, humans had established a hub, a place not for power, but for cooperation. Rhea stood in the middle of the plaza, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She had seen what had happened over the last few cycles. The Empire had attempted to assert dominance, sending fleets to key points in human-controlled space. Every time, they found empty docks, silent stations, and humans who had quietly withdrawn from Imperial systems. Then, one by one, independent systems had risen to support human colonies, creating networks of connection that the Empire had never anticipated. "Captain Rhea," a voice called from behind her. It was Leela, the navigator she often relied on. "We've got incoming traffic, several ships from the outer colonies. They've requested docking and supplies." Rhea smiled, a calm and steady smile. "Let them in. Make sure they feel welcome." Across the plaza, the newcomers began to arrive. Ships from worlds that had once been ignored or oppressed glided toward the station, their crews waving in greeting. Children ran ahead, eager to see what lay within the human hub. Teachers stepped out, carrying books and devices for learning. Engineers carried tools, their eyes bright with curiosity and purpose. Mara watched from the edge of the plaza, holding the hand of a young child from another world. The child had wide eyes and feathers in their hair, marking them as a member of a species known for their skyward flight. "Do you think they'll like it here?" the child asked. "They already do," Mara said. "They'll feel safe here, and that's the most important thing." Jonah stood beside her, looking out at the ships arriving. "We never imagined it would grow like this," he said softly. "Not just humans, but all of them. It's a galaxy connected through care, not fear." A message arrived from the far reaches of space, broadcast through the network of human and allied systems. It was simple, yet powerful. "We are ready to support each other. We will not forget. We will not abandon those who need us." The words traveled quickly, reaching the ears of beings on remote moons, distant planets, and hidden outposts. The galaxy listened, and it began to respond. In the Imperial capital, the Council met in tense silence. The records showed systems once under strict control, now thriving independently, guided by the quiet influence of humans and their allies. The fleets that had once been symbols of unquestioned authority now served a different purpose: observation. Admiral Korvek, stationed on one of the border fleets, looked out at the stars. His fleet had been ready to act, to strike, to remind humans of the Empire's power. Instead, they had witnessed the galaxy reorganizing itself in a way that no weapon could stop. "They've done it," he said to his second-in-command. "They've created something we cannot control." "What is it?" the officer asked. Korvek paused. "A galaxy that remembers." Meanwhile, on a distant frontier world, a teacher named Sierra watched as children of all species gathered in a circle. They were learning to read, to calculate, and to understand the stars around them. One child held a drawing of a small human boy standing among stars, holding hands with figures of other species. The children studied it carefully. "Who is this?" one asked. Sierra knelt beside them. "He's someone who taught us that every life matters, that even a single small voice can change the galaxy." The children nodded, eyes wide with understanding. In that moment, the memory of the child became more than a story. It became a guide, a way to live. Back at Starbridge, Rhea oversaw the distribution of supplies. Ships arrived carrying medicine, food, tools, and learning devices. Volunteers from many species worked together, setting up areas for classrooms, repair bays, and marketplaces. They spoke different languages, but they communicated with gestures, shared understanding, and the determination to help. Jonah approached Rhea. "They're building something bigger than we thought," he said. "It's not just human colonies. It's every world that has decided to stand together." Rhea nodded. "And it's growing faster than any fleet could, faster than any empire could hope to suppress. This is what happens when people choose to care." On the edges of human-controlled space, fleets that had once been purely exploratory began to patrol in new ways. Not to conquer, not to enforce, but to protect. They moved quietly through trade lanes, offering assistance to stations, ships, and colonies that needed support. The human ships became a presence that the galaxy could rely on. Even within the Empire, officers like Terran began to see the value in this approach. Where once he had believed control and fear were the only ways to maintain order, he now saw the strength in trust, in connection, and in remembering those who had been overlooked. On a planet once ruled entirely by imperial governors, local councils now operated openly. Human advisors were present, not to lead, but to guide, to teach, and to offer perspective. Communities rebuilt, using technology and knowledge shared by those who had once been considered insignificant. In the center of the galaxy, a memorial station had been constructed, floating in neutral space. It was simple, elegant, and peaceful. There, names of those who had inspired connection and care were engraved, beginning with the human child who had been lost so long ago. Flowers from different worlds floated around it in low gravity, and soft lights glowed along the paths, illuminating images of stars and hands clasped together. Visitors from across species came to leave tokens, a carved stone, a small flower, or a drawing. They shared stories of kindness, bravery, and perseverance. The memorial became a symbol, not of war or revenge, but of what the galaxy could become when it remembered to care. Mara and Jonah visited the station, holding hands as they looked at the simple, glowing monument. Mara traced her fingers over the engraving of their child's name. "He would have liked this," she whispered. "Not because it honors him, but because it shows everyone what's possible when we remember." Jonah nodded. "He changed the stars without knowing it." Back on Haven's Rise, children played together under the light of a distant sun. They studied, laughed, and explored. Teachers from many species guided them, sharing knowledge, culture, and hope. Ships continued to arrive, carrying supplies, volunteers, and messages. Every arrival was met with excitement, every departure with a promise to return. Rhea walked through the plaza, watching the activity. Ships from worlds that had once been silent now carried signs of life and collaboration. Engineers from far-off colonies helped repair equipment. Traders exchanged goods freely. Children ran between the docks and open halls, laughing as they shared discoveries. A young pilot approached Rhea, holding a small model ship he had built. "I made this to remind me of Eli," he said. "So I never forget how one small person changed so many lives." Rhea smiled, kneeling to look at it. "You're carrying the story forward," she said. "That's the most important part." Above the plaza, the stars shone brighter than ever. Not because of any weapon, nor because of any fleet, but because of the countless small choices made by countless beings. Each act of kindness, each story shared, each connection formed was like a star added to the sky. In the imperial capital, the council could no longer ignore the change. The galaxy had grown beyond their control, shaped by trust, memory, and collaboration. They sent envoys to observe, to report, and to learn. Slowly, some officers began to understand that power without care was empty. On the outskirts of the galaxy, Mara stood with her arms open as a group of children from several worlds ran toward her, carrying drawings, gifts, and stories. Each one showed that the memory of the child who had been lost was alive in every corner of the galaxy. "They're learning," she said softly to Jonah, "learning how to remember and how to stand together." Jonah smiled. "They are creating a future worth protecting." In the quiet dark of space, human ships continued their gentle journeys. They did not seek glory. They did not demand recognition. They moved with care, carrying hope, knowledge, and connection wherever they went. And in every station, every planet, and every corridor of the galaxy, beings of many species began to remember one truth, that even the smallest life could light the stars. The Empire still existed, its fleets still patrolled, and its laws still governed many worlds. But the galaxy had changed in a way no single force could undo. Everywhere, the memory of a child inspired acts of courage, kindness, and unity. And in that quiet, steady presence, the galaxy learned the greatest lesson of all. Strength is not only measured in power, but in care. Not in control, but in connection. Not in fear, but in memory. Mara and Jonah stood together on the observation deck of a human hub world, watching the stars stretch across the horizon. Ships moved between worlds, people laughed and learned, and small acts of courage grew into a network that no one could ignore. "They will never forget him," Mara said. "No," Jonah replied, "and because of that, the galaxy will never forget itself." Above them, the stars burned bright, each one a promise, a memory, and a story carried forward across the endless dark. The galaxy had learned to shine together, guided by the light of one small human child who had dared to dream.